the real issue before us is, as we discussed within the World Academy and in our sister organizations, the challenges facing humanity today, we keep coming back to this issue that how are we going to bring about significant changes that are needed in all fields of life, whether it's politics, international security, the way we structure our economies, the way we deal with nature, the way we educate and develop people, without leaders, without a new type of leaders. We see in history, it seems, that only at critical moments in history, like at the time of the founding of the United States, or in my country, the American Civil War, during World War II, there are rare periods at the end of the Cold War. There seem to be rare periods when the kind of leadership that we need in India at the time of the battle for independence, or in South Africa against apartheid, there seem to be only rare moments when we really get the kind of leaders we need to bring about rapid change. Now we know the challenges facing us are greater than ever before. They're multidimensional. They cover all spheres. So naturally, leadership becomes a critical issue for us. So that's why in this course, our goal is to look at leadership in the broadest terms. How are we going to get not only the political leadership that we need, how are we going to get the leadership in business to transform the way we run our companies and our economy? How are we going to get the leaders in civil society? How are we going to get military leaders who understand that the real challenge today is human security and not defending national borders or building up arsenals? How are we going to get the leaders in all fields of science? And I would say, particularly my own bias in the social sciences needed to transform our understanding of the way we think about society and its development. And how are we going to get the leaders in the arts, humanities, and religion we need to bring all people together rather than to divide them by culture, by language, by religion, or anything else. So this is central to all the issues that the World Academy is looking at, and certainly all the issues that humanity is facing today. And the question is, what type of leaders? This really, though we have not spelled it out, this course is really not a generic course on leadership. Let's study all types of leaders, good leaders, bad leaders, leaders who have sunk the ship, leaders that have been ahead of their times. What we're really looking at are what are the qualities of leadership and the processes of leadership that we need today, and how are we going to develop people who are capable of it. So it's not so much an analysis of what differentiated Julius Caesar from Genghis Khan or Akbar or anyone else. We're really looking towards the future, towards the type of leaders we need. And I think all our discussions within the Academy and in our sister organizations already reinforce the idea. We're talking about value-based leaders. Leaders that are empowering people and succeeding in empowering the society to be more effective. Leaders that are inclusive, not those that are dividing and excluding populations. Leaders that are creative, because we need new types of solutions that don't exist today. Leaders that are thinking not just of how to solve today's problem, but how society has to evolve to be much more effective in the future. Leaders that will help us transform the society we have today to the society of the future. So these are indeed challenging questions. Last fall we had a very interesting, the first course that we organized here, we called it a transdisciplinary course on individuality and accomplishment. And that was really a base for the discussions we had here, and we'll be building a lot on some of the very interesting things that came up in that course. But these two terms, individuality and accomplishment, I'd like to reflect on for a minute. Clearly, when we talk about, the word individual in English is ambiguous. It refers to we each are individuals in the sense we're a single person. That's an individual. But by individual, we also mean, and I think more centrally, we mean somebody who has developed their own way of thinking and acting, somebody who's not just a rubber stamp of the society, not just conforming with the society, but somebody who's thinking for themselves, who's adapted their own values, who's internalized the truths of history, and acts out of deep conviction in what they're doing, not just in order to gain social acceptance. All of the great psychologists of the 20th century, from Jung to Carl Rogers and Maslow, talked about self-realized or self-actualized individuals. And I think clearly for the future, we're talking about leaders. We don't want leaders who are going to tell us everything's great. We don't want leaders who to tell us how we're better than everybody else. We want leaders who are going to really help us outgrow the limitations of today and move into a new vision of the future. So we're really talking about leaders who are individuals, not leaders who are just popular and get people to follow them down or off the end of the cliff. The other word is very important, and that word was accomplishment. What do we mean by leadership? What is leadership really all about? Human beings in society, we try to accomplish things. We try to accomplish many things. We're looking to promote our security. We're looking to promote our welfare and well-being. We want to enjoy ourselves. We've got leaders in sports, we've got leaders in business, we've got leaders in all different fields. But wherever we talk of leadership, we're talking about purposeful. There's a purpose behind it. Even if it's only leadership that we should enjoy ourselves, there's a purpose in that enjoyment. So it raises a question, and we spent a lot of time exploring that question. What do we mean by accomplishment, and how do individuals accomplish? And in my comments this morning, I would like to focus more generally on what is the process? What have we learned about the process of human accomplishment in very, very broad, general terms? This was a course, we called it a transdisciplinary course, where we were looking at accomplishment, whether it's in politics or business and economics or society or in any field. Is there a commonality to that? If we're looking for common characteristics of leadership that transcend disciplines, transcend fields, then that implies that there must be something transcendent about the process of human accomplishment as well. So I'd like to briefly review what we discussed during the two courses that we had in the fall. I think fundamental statement that accomplishment is a process. It's interesting, we have so many social sciences that are focusing on how do we build effective governance, how do we build effective economies, how do we grow effective companies, how does society develop, but it's very hard to find any underlying principles that these social sciences have in common with each other. That's what we were aiming at in the fall. Is there something fundamental to human accomplishment that transcends different fields? And our conclusion was that process is a psychological process and a social process. It has a psychological dimension which has a lot to do with leadership, and it has a social dimension which also has a tremendous amount to do with leadership. The leader has to be able to think differently or do something in himself, and he has to be able to communicate that to other people and inspire them or help them find a way to do that. We also stressed that there's something fundamental to human accomplishment in any field, and that it's driven by human energy. It's a very basic generic statement that when people want to accomplish something, they do it because they're motivated to do it. They do it because they're committed to do it. If leaders are effective, they're effective because they are able to release the energy and direct the energy of other people or self-direct that energy towards goals. We see in society today there's a tremendous amount of energy. Go down into Dubrovnik during a crowded day when the tourists are here, and you'll see an enormous energy. But everybody going in a different direction, trying to accomplish something for themselves, but nothing really for the society, nothing that takes us forward. So energy is in huge abundance today, but how is that energy directed? How is it focused? How is it channeled in order to get effective results? And clearly leadership has a tremendous amount to do with whether we have this energy spilling over on all sides into conflict between people and conflict between organizations or competition between nations, and we're able to mobilize this energy and direct it. So in real brief substance, conclusions, all human accomplishment involves the generation and release of energy, focusing that energy into a directed force, transformation of that force into an effective power, and expression of that power through skilled, knowledgeable action in different fields. These are 4 generalizations that we discussed in our 2 earlier courses at Dubrovnik. Then what would be the process of leadership? And I'm talking very generically now. It seems that effective leaders should be able to help awaken the aspiration of people and the will or determination to accomplish something. And we'll know that when they succeed in generating the energy and releasing energy in society. We're going to hear later this week from Alexander Likitol share with us some of his personal insights from working with Mikhail Gorbachev during the most dramatic transformation that the world has seen in the last 60 years, and how the energy was awakened, the energy was released in that process. This is clearly critical. We're going to talk, I'm sure a number of you will talk about Mahatma Gandhi, and when he started his struggle for the freedom struggle in India, his main task was how to awaken the population, this huge, complacent, resigned population which had been used to being dominated by foreigners for hundreds of years, how to awaken them to the determination we must be free, and we must be free now, and we can do something about it, and we're going to act on it. How to convert that energy into an effective force. I'm thinking of an analogy from physics. You've got energy everywhere, but if you want to accomplish any work with that energy, first thing you've got to do is channel it the way we capture the solar energy and direct it, the way we capture the energy of a river, the kinetic energy of a river, and we channel it through the dam and through the sluice gates into a turbine in order to concentrate it and direct it like a laser. Well, in human activity, the first thing we have to do is we have to give it a direction in our minds. We may give it a direction through a visionary idea like Jean Monnet about a united Europe, high values like we want to deliver the best quality service, or we want to have the highest level of human welfare, whatever it may be, through stories, through myths, through goals, through plans, through the decisions we take. But an effective leader has to, through one or all of these means, not only release the energy, but give it a direction and help people understand what they can do to convert this energy into accomplishing something that they haven't done before. But that's not enough. We're going to hear a number of our speakers are going to talk about the central importance of organization in leadership. No leader accomplishes only on his own. Any leader accomplishes in the measure he can work with others, whether informally, like the freedom movement in India was primarily, there was a Congress party, but it was pretty much an informal program. One day Mahatma Gandhi said that the nation is going to protest against British rule, and I want everybody to go out there and make salt. Go to the beaches and make salt, because there was a tax on salt and it was illegal for Indians to make salt. And even the people around him thought, well, this is this is going to be a non-starter, as they say in India. And they got word about 6 hours later that all over India, the population had been mobilized, hundreds of thousands of people. The British were completely helpless because there was no way they could stop hundreds of thousands of people from going to the beach and making salt. And in one act of leadership, through an organized action, they conveyed the fact that the country wants a change. And that was really a significant step in the move towards independence. So whether it's an informal movement like this or a formal organization, like when President Kennedy said in '61 that within 10 years or 9 years we're going to land a man on the moon, and NASA worked with about 50,000 different organizations in close coordination in order to make that possible, and they actually did it 6 months early. So clearly this leadership is not just an individual thing. It's very much a question of how individuals relate to each other in different form, how they coordinate their actions, and we're going to explore the link between the individual leader and the organization. And of course that raises another issue that's very important for us. What is the role of organizations in leadership? And the discussion we've been having within the World Academy and in Club of Rome and other organizations is what can we as organizations do to be leaders, to be catalysts of the larger organizational framework which we call civil society or we call humanity. And the same process is there, whether we're talking about an individual leader or an organization. And the Academy, in trying to think about what are the ideas that can provide leadership and thought that will lead to action, it's not just the ideas for the Academy that will lead us to action, but what are the moving ideas that can act as leaders for the society today? And that's this new paradigm project that we've been working on with our partners, because we really think ideas can also be leaders. A leader doesn't need to be necessarily an individual only. Ideas, once they catch on, become leaders to the collective for action. And what are those ideas that should lead us in future? So this process can be looked at the level of the individual, at the level of the idea, at the level of the organization, at the level of humanity as a whole. Because I think we all feel from our discussions, humanity needs leadership. It's not just nations that need leadership, and we need leadership in every field. And finally, we need this energy focused as a force, given power by the fact that it's working in a coordinated way through some type of structure. It needs to be expressed. And we know, and every leader knows, that to express a great idea with great energy in an organized way requires a tremendous amount of discretion, of skill, of subtlety, and we're going to also be talking about the attitudes, the skills needed for effective leadership, whether it's by the individual or the organization. And when you get all of this, I think we get what we can call a complete circuit. You get that raging water from the river, you've channeled it through a dam, you've put it through the sluice gates, you've converted it through the turbine, you've distributed it through a complex system of distribution and transmission, and finally it comes into the room like here, and ultimately it depends on a tiny little filament in the bulb or in the wire in the wall and the switch as to whether or not we get the light or not. We need to be sure in our leadership discussion that we complete the circuit until we actually get the results that we're looking at. So this is an all-encompassing topic, and I think we all recognize that, and that's why we have such an interesting group here, because we're bringing people from all different types and levels of experience to look at a common process from different angles. We're really here, and I should make this clear to all of those who are who are listening in from outside. We're not here to deliver an accepted knowledge. We're here to create a new course with a greater understanding. I'm certainly here for that purpose, so we can all understand this process better and then find a way to pass this knowledge on to others through our educational system and through other means as well. Giving one example of this process from George Washington, I'm going to spend very little time on it, but he's a fascinating example of a person who became an inadvertent leader to found a new nation. It was never his goal to found a new nation. If he had any goal, it was to become an officer in the British Army. And fortunately for all of the Americans, he was shunned by the British and looked down on because he's only a colonial. And that really made him realize that his path to self-realization can only be if America has independence. He was a remarkable example of a person who came to embody, he wasn't born with it, he came to embody high ideals and values that America must be free. He took a ragtag militia, people who were just farmers, who had no prior experience, and built up the Continental Army and put them through enormous challenges and brought out the best in them, and with a good deal of good fortune, not all because of his capacity, was able to defeat, at least sustain itself against what was then the best army in the whole world. And it was a very, very precarious thing. But what was equally interesting is what he didn't do. When he was the head of the Continental Army, and when the Congress refused to give food, refused to give clothes, refused to give shoes to his people, when they wanted to go out and rampage on the countryside to get what they needed for their survival, he said, "No, I will not exercise that power that I have. We are under the Continental Army, and unless the military is going to subordinate itself to the civilian authority, this country doesn't have the future that we dream of." And he subjected himself and his people to tremendous hardship simply because the Continental Congress at that time didn't have the power, didn't have the sensitivity, didn't have the support it needed from the colonies. And then when he became president, he did the same thing. He said, the military is under the authority of the civilians, and the civilian president is under the authority of the rule of law and the Constitution. And he set precedents which have worked pretty well for us over more than 200 years, because as a leader, he knew the importance of being able to refrain from the exercise of power even when you have it. He knew that leadership is not just about using the power we have. So he's a fascinating example of the many we'll discuss today. Steve Jobs is another fascinating example, and I've chosen it from a very different field and, of course, a very different age for a purpose, because he too embodied the capacity to release enormous amount of energy and direct it. When we talk about great leaders, we don't mean that they're perfect individuals or great in all respects. I think we've all had enough experience to know a great leadership, we are human beings, and if we're great, we tend to be great in some field and like everybody else in others. And that was certainly true of Steve Jobs. But Jobs had I'd say he was really in touch with an aspiration of my generation in America, growing up in the post-war period. He grew up in the hippie generation. He grew up in Silicon Valley. He really understood the anxiety that people have about the computer and about the growing taking over of life by the machine, and the fear in the early 80s, especially when the PC came out, we're going to all be eliminated by computers pretty soon. And he was able to tune into that aspiration of society that machines should work for us, not vice versa. We shouldn't be replaced by the machines. We should be empowered by the technology that we develop. And I think that was one of the secrets behind this phenomenal success that he's had at each level as he went through his career. So if I wanted to generalize about the process, and I hope we can give some thought to it during the day, this is what leaders do. They release energy, they direct that energy, they channel it through some type of organization, and get it to express effectively in action through minute individual acts. So this is the challenge we have. How are we going to prepare leaders capable of addressing the pressing challenges posed by increasing speed of change, complexity, globalization? How are we going to develop those leaders capable of envisioning answers and solutions that don't exist today, ideas that we don't have today? How are we going to prepare countless numbers of people to play leadership roles at different levels of the society? Thank you. Now I'd like to turn it over to our panelists. Pierre, we'll start with you, and the camera will come to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Garry, for this first introduction and how energy can be turned into can turn leaders into effective leaders. My first question, you mentioned very quickly that there were in some case individualized leader. That was the beginning of your presentation. You mentioned individual as the process of internalizing acts with a deep inner conviction, and you also mentioned popular leader. And you from my perspective, you've been quickly on this. How do you define a popular leader, and what makes the difference between a popular leader and an individualized leader?
It's a good question. I think what I meant was that we know today, and we see this, I see it in this U.S. at every election, but I think it's pretty common all over the world. We see that leaders very often just telling people what they think they'll want to hear and appealing to the lowest common denominator. I'm living in South India. It's a big democracy, but I see that what we really have 99 or 95% is we've got popular leaders telling the people, look, I'm of your community, I'm of your religious group, I'm going to give you free color TVs or free electricity. There are rare, wonderful examples, inspiring. Gandhi was an example, Nehru was an example, and that we've had many other rare examples of leaders who did not just appeal to the populace, but quite the contrary. Gandhiji said that you should overcome your caste differences. He told the caste Hindus that they should embrace those who had been called outcasts. And he went in every village he went to, he went and lived and slept and ate in the houses of who we call the Harijans, completely a breaking from what we call populism. There was a very successful chief minister in the state of Andhra Pradesh about 10 years ago who said, look, all the electricity departments in India are bankrupted because they're all giving free electricity to the farmers, and the farmers turn on the pump sets and go to sleep and waste all of the water because it's free. And he said, we can't afford to do this. It's bankrupting every state government. So we have to introduce tariffs for the electricity. And he was voted out of power. Otherwise extremely successful. So we all understand the tendency, the temptation, and the ease with which it is to appeal to populism. But the type of leaders we need are those whose I don't mean that a leader can afford to ignore popular opinion. Abraham Lincoln was an inspiring example, because Lincoln, when he was elected president, came with the deepest conviction that we must abolish slavery in America. But he also came with the conviction that we have to keep America united. And at that point, the moment he was elected, the country split in two because the southern states didn't want a president whose goal was to abolish slavery. And it's a wonderful story of how he managed that process, because he had the extreme abolitionists in the North, and they were very adamant, deeply religious abolitionists who were saying, okay, now you're president, you must abolish slavery immediately. And he knew that if he did that, the country, there wouldn't be a United States today. We'd have a bunch of European countries trying to recreate a union. On the other side, finally, when the North began to gain some uppermost hand in the Civil War, there was a great pressure from the Unionists who said, okay, if you forget this thing about abolishing slavery, we'll be able to bring the South in, reunify the country, and everything will be all right, and let's not raise this difficult issue for another 50 years or something. But at the particular point in time, he went against all of the advice, even amongst most of his cabinet members, and he said, now is the moment and he issued the proclamation saying, we're abolishing slavery. He knew how to manage these two. He certainly did it because he was sensitive to the public. In fact, he was more in tune with the public than those people around him who thought they were speaking the conventional wisdom. He knew what the society would really accept, and he was able to inspire them to bring out the best in them to accomplish something that couldn't otherwise be done. So I think it's not a question of that you follow the populists or you ignore the populists. Neither of those is going to get us. You have to be in touch with the society, but you also have to know not to be just conforming to it, but how to give direction to the social energy and to the social values as well. So that's a fine art, and I hope you'll understand it. I'll understand it better at the end of our course. Very good question. Just to clarify the role of the panelists, you're welcome to ask questions, but the idea was not just that. You're also welcome to make brief comments of your own. The idea was to spread the discussion, so I don't want to monopolize it in this way. So we'll go to Andras, and if you want to make a comment after, we'll come back. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Garry. You set the scene. If you allow, I will speak out of my heart, because this is the core of our being, isn't it? When I came yesterday to Dubrovnik, I was dead as overworked, overloaded, like everybody else. And when I woke up this morning, I listened to the wind, I listened to the sea, to the birds, to the waves, and to the silence. And I went for a walk, and I saw this majestic landscape here in Dubrovnik. I was overwhelmed, and I was happy to be here with all of you. When we talk about energy, we have two words which come up. It's abundance and it's scarcity. And nowadays we are talking most in the media, it's about scarcity, and we have to, it's crisis, etc., energy, climate change, and you name it. We have still four words. It's limitation, conditioning, boundaries, separateness. So which give rise to fear. And what is fear? I found a very nice acronym for fear. It's false evidence appearing real. Fear. So another image popped up when you spoke. It's about directing, give a direction to energy. I'm a musician, that's the core of my being. I'm functioning through vibrations, through frequencies. And when you have a conductor of an orchestra with 90 or 110 people, a good conductor does nothing else than give a feel for what is co-created. He doesn't give a direction, because every musician is a top musician. But he is there, and the good director is the one who is not needed anymore in an orchestra. And if people don't listen to each other, there's no orchestra, there's no symphony, there's only cacophony. So this is a good image for our society also, for organizations, big organizations, who are, where the hierarchical structure is still dominant. We have the word empowerment, but the word empowerment, what does it mean in concrete? It does mean, in a lot of situations, I give a direction and you execute. That's not empowerment, that's slavery. That's not creativity. In French we have the saying, je suis le guide, which means I am the guide, but I'm also the follower of the guide, because suivre is following and being. So there's a wonderful mix about following and leaders. You spoke about awakening. This is the time to do it, because it's in the air. Thank God people in the world are more and more awakening and taking their responsibility and their fate in their own hands, and taking responsibility for their own emotions, for their own actions, and for the outcome of their actions, because you're not only responsible for the things you do, you are also responsible for the things you are not doing. So there's a tremendous awakening, but the key now to make a big shift and make a big leap in society is that we should learn to work together and not separately, and not everybody doing his or her thing. You spoke about populist leaders, and we are bound to perception. And when you listen to discussion on television, you get only 1 minute, or you have to speak in one-liners, and you have to score. You have to be the winner of a debate. That's not a discussion. This is a war. It's battlefield. I have the image of a selfie, but what is a self? People are taking selfies, but where is the self? The bigger self. And let me end with a wonderful quadrant I heard yesterday, the day before yesterday on the webinar. You have four. You have on the left, you have competence, which is most of the day we are competent. Most of the day we are incompetent, doing things which are incompetent. On the left upper side you have greatness, and then on the right upper side you have genius. So this is when Mr. Schlaus, in his introduction, everybody has a wonderful untapped potential of unknown qualities. But the drama of our society is that, and it starts at education in the schools. Creativity is killed in children also by our so-called educational system, and most of the people are unaware of how much they can do, how much they can achieve as an individual, but not separate from society. As an individual, attuned to what Pierre-Antoine named yesterday, coined as a collective intelligence and collective consciousness. So when we are able to transcend our little I, then we are attuned to what is bigger than ourselves, and that is, to my mind, that is real leadership.
Okay. Would you like to go now, or?
Yeah, I can go with one additional question that came back to your presentation. In the end of your first answer about being popular, you said this is more an art than a science. You know, this way of deciding, there's no rules to be applied. It's really sensing what the population wants, and sometimes being capable of knowing in between the lines. So this is, in my words, art more than science. My question is now, if leadership is an art, of course mixing skills, so in that sense science. For me, leadership is the art of decision making, because at some point of time you have to put a boundary, a limit. This is acceptable, this is not acceptable. This is, in my world, this is giving a shape There's a full potential of energy, full potential of possibilities, but at one point of time there is this decision, this way, and there's no perfect decision. We all know that. There are always pros and cons. And my question is if you could help me better describe this ability to give a limit, to give a shape. And where does it come from? Is it part of a rational, logical, deductive process? Is it an intuition? Is it a mix of that? So if I could reframe my question, it would be, how does leaders give limits and take decisions?
Wow. Wonderful question. It's worth coming to Dubrovnik to hear one question like that. So thoughtful. And fortunately for me, and I'm going to try to give you some answer, but fortunately we have a whole session on decision making with Donato. We have another, which I think this is central to that. We have a session here which you're going to be speaking on, which I call Social Insight and Future Vision, which to me, it was directly on this issue as well. And I think several other of the topics. So the answer is, if we get the answer to this, we've really justified our 4 days here. I'd just like to throw out a few thoughts that are uppermost in my mind about it. In that book about Steve Jobs that came out a few years ago, he said he traveled in India for 6 months, barefoot and, just a dropout, and he learned the importance of intuition when he was there. And he says this 25 years later, 30 years later at Stanford, the commencement, he says this is one of the most important things he learned. And I don't think he was just talking off the top of his head. What I tried to allude to in my 2 brief reference to him was he really was in tune with where his whole generation. I wouldn't say it's a visionary in the sense he saw something he gave expression to something which many people, and myself included, were feeling at that time. But he found a way to translate it into action. Actually convert it into a product, which is the ultimate taking of an idea and converting it into an object. The same was true of Gandhi and other of the freedom fighters who sensed when the time was right. And what do we mean by intuition? I think the word sounds a little more, it has a mystical dimension, but it has an emotional dimension. It has a sense dimension. When the first model prototype of the iPhone was developed, Jobs, they were planning, okay, we've got it now, we'll launch it and be in production and on the stores in 3 months. He came in the next morning and he said, no. He said, I just don't love this product. And when they said, what's wrong with it, Steve? It does everything we want. Yeah, but when I hold it in my hand, it doesn't feel the way, I don't love it. And he did the same thing with the Apple stores. So I think whether you call this sensation or emotion or intuition, maybe there are 3 different levels. The thing they have in common is it doesn't follow the logic, the stereotype logic of it's either good or bad, it's either yes or no, and so forth. It recognizes the subtlety and complexity and subjectivity of our human existence. And I think there's no doubt in my mind at all, and I hope we can discuss this in decision making, that effective decision making is never simply a question of what's the objective situation. The most dramatic example I know of is when FDR became the president of the U.S. in 1932 in the middle of a banking crisis, and there 6,000 banks had failed, and all the economists said, we don't really have a solution to this. He said, I have a solution. He got on the radio and he addressed the American people. It was his first fireside chat. And he said, look, 6,000 banks have failed. Every day you're lining up at the bank to take out more money. At this rate, all our banks will will fail. It's just the best bank will fail because no bank keeps all their money in the bank. Tomorrow, Monday morning, I'm going to open the banks. I want you to go back, stand in line, and redeposit your money. It sounded absurd. And everybody around him must have thought, well, who did we elect as president? We've been struggling for 3 years against and that's what happened. They did it because he appealed not only to the logic that, look, any bank will fail if everybody takes their money out. He appealed to the emotion of the people. He said, we're Americans. We are creating this problem for ourselves because we're afraid. The real thing we should fear is our fear. We're courageous people. Let's act like Americans. Go back and put the money in. That doesn't come from logic. That comes from this other side of the equation. So I think this is a big topic, and I hope to hear many comments from it. Okay, we have 1 more minute, and then we open it up. So, Andres?
Yes, if I may add to that, most genius decision-making comes from the belly, or from the gut feeling, and not from logic, not from rationality. I heard a story about a football team and its manager, and he said, he wrote it in a newspaper, my best decision was at 4 o'clock in the morning when I woke up, then I got it. And that's what my tactic for the next game. So it's not rational. It's more than that. It's what you said. It's appealing to emotions. It's more. When you spoke about channeling and giving direction, you said give a direction in our minds. But I immediately wrote down and in our hearts, because love energy is the purest energy there is on this earth and beyond the earth.
Great. Okay. Comments, questions, ideas? Alberto.
Wonderful, really nice. The challenge, one of the challenge, in my opinion, is to understand how we either foster the social construction of effective leaders, or how often we sabotage the natural emerging of natural leaders. In my mind, I would like to know what you think. For example, democracy allow more freedom of expression, and so have more people willing to speak up, and so to become leaders. Dictatorship have less, fertile soil to allow the emergence of leadership. But what are also some of the social condition that either foster or hamper? Wilhelm Reich, for example, wrote an interesting book, Mass Psychology of Fascism, showing how in black, reactionary fascism, but also in Marxist-Leninist fascism, how that process, and the last one, of course, we have a feudal class, and so, but basically, if we will understand how society and even family foster or hampers, we would be better off.
Great, great. Let's hear from others, and then at the end we'll take some time and respond. And I have to request those of you who are speaking, since the mic is up here, maybe for this purpose you can move it out on the table and move it a little out until the end of the discussion so we pick up the voices. But try to speak up as much as you can, because we'd like everybody online to hear you as much as possible. Well, you can't take it too far because the wire. Just see how. Let's see how. Oh yeah, you can turn the camera certainly.
See, young people take the leadership.
Inclusive leadership.
Okay. Hold on.
Yes. Maybe we're overly concerned about individual leaders, because groups can function without a leader. There is something called situational leadership. That you have a team of people, they have a common purpose, and there is no particular leader. But because they have different kind of knowledge or different kind of skills, when a situation arises, the one that is, let's say, most competent in the field, etc., he takes on the leadership. I just wanted to add another thing, because we have a little bit overly obsessed about individual creativity. And I know that a lot of inventions, even in the past discoveries, have been credited to a single person. Now, they did not work singly. They worked with other people. But maybe, and that may be the fault of let's say, religion like Christianity, that actually we focus on the individual too much. Because there's also, by the way, when it comes to creativity, there's a field called synectics, and there's group creativity. It does not, in the group creativity, why does it work? If in a group of people of different backgrounds, they have different perception of things, view things very differently, have different optics, if you like. And if the output of one brain is used legitimately just as an input into other brains, rather than that there is kind of too much of a proprietary feeling about the idea, it's my idea. No, this is just, let's say, a bit of the raw material. And others, that can work. So I just wanted to raise this question that I think maybe in our concern of leadership, leaders, individual leaders, we should think of leaderships and the same thing about creativity. And what I meant by that really think about situational leaders rather than just permanent leaders.
I think we had Winston and Donato and Philippe, and Eva, right? Winston.
Yeah, I just
try to speak up as much as you can.
yes, I just a quick question. Like all these other comments, so let me say first how much I'm appreciative of that, and I'm certainly appreciative of the notion of the interconnectedness of leadership and the interconnectedness of group behavior in the processes of creating solutions to human problems. The issue that I just wanted to put on the table, lest it be forgotten, is this. The critical question that I think confronts leadership is fundamentally the question of the processes of policy making, policy application, policy appraisal. And that means that we are particularly concerned about the question of leadership and rationality and objectivity, if you like, and the larger question that perhaps the untapped resource is either individual or collective creativity, which is, to my mind, correlative with the question of rationality. And the problem that I think we are confronted with on the question of creativity is whether it is metaphysical or whether there are some forms of psychological and psychoanalytical explanations, meaning that there are components of the mind that we haven't fully used. It may well be that in India they've tapped into some of these components of the mind intuitively. Freud, in the Western tradition, talked about tapping into creativity using the foundations of free fantasy as a way of solving human problems in a creative and constructive way.
Donato.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody who spoke until now. So you go to Garry, because I think that if the purpose of this course is to set a new direction, I think we're going well ahead. I mean, it's already a very good start. set in this new direction, all what you have been saying. I would like to reflect on the word of Andres and this apparent dichotomy between empowerment and the perverse effect of empowerment vis-à-vis something else that could be acknowledgement. What is the effect of empowerment and what is the effect of acknowledgement? I think that Andres said empowerment could bring us to slavery. This is the word used. And in a sense, it could be, because if we look at it from a mechanicistic approach, I mean, you as a leader, you convey a message, and through your message, you need to create a result, and you have followers. As you said, they obey orders somehow, whether they are meat managers or people that execute what you empower them to do. That could be a natural conclusion. Of course, empowerment in managerial terms means something else. It means actually the opposite. It means giving the instruments for others to deliver. This is what it means. But why I say dichotomy with acknowledgement? Because I think that the word acknowledgement means much more than empowerment. And why it means much more? Because it means recognition. It means the ability to recognize on our hand as leaders, as potential leaders, or as followers, as Andres said, the natural inclination and the possibilities, the capacities, the qualities of other individuals. So whether you are the person that acknowledges others, or whether you are acknowledged, there is a very intimate sense of recognition and of gratification in the acknowledgement itself. So I would, and I think this is an item for consideration, I hope, but I think it's very important to give appropriate weight to the word and the act of acknowledgement in leadership. I think this is a fundamental moment in really exercising leadership. And we experience that on everyday's life, in our own experiences. Whether we acknowledge the person that cleans our office, whether we acknowledge an authoritative scientist, we acknowledge his, her presence. We acknowledge the role that this person is playing in that particular moment. We acknowledge the essence of this individual as well. So we give them a role in our society. And I think this, I mean, again, I don't want to elaborate too much on this item, but I think it's a fundamental word that we should keep in mind if we think about an ingredient that can help us define what leadership means.
Thank you. I know, you don't give it there.
No, it's
Phil. Okay, Phil.
I would like to take the opportunity to readdress two topics. The first one is about having the best idea at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I would like to engage our audience. What do you do with all the ideas that you get at 4 o'clock in the morning? How do you go from having an individualistic idea to bring it to a collective idea? And I would really appreciate if you would take some time to reflect and maybe act upon this proposal that was shared this morning. And the second part is also talking from the heart, the love, the presence. How much do we invest into informal settings? Meeting, dialoguing in informal settings. Is that also part of the solution? Usually when we are in a formal setting, we have processes, we have time, we have constraints. How much more can we unleash energy? Redirect energy, share, distribute energy when we are in informal settings. And I just leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Eva.
I will take care. Let me comment on several very important things that have been raised
basically said. First, what Bogdan said, our former president, late Arnold Cleveland, actually put the words, nobody in charge, characterizing the current situation where there is no strict leaders, but somehow things are coming by, in a rather strange way. I think that interaction between individual and collective is a part of psychology we don't understand. By the way, when I was preparing this talk, I looked into this on Wikipedia. Everybody does, I guess. I looked at the leadership section, and out of whatever 200 references, 190 something are psychologists. So I think it's very proper that we have two psychologists here, Garry and Alberto, to help us there. But this sociological question of leaders and followers is a very dynamic one. Another thing, speaking and closely linked, is what Donato said. There is a famous statement by Sir Isaac Newton. He said, I am what I am because I am on the shoulders of the giants. And then Robert Merton, the famous sociologist, wrote a book on that very important things. And when you read the Nobel Prize acceptance speeches, you always find out that all the Nobel Prize winners always claim who are their, so to say, fathers, grandfathers. In my recent behavior, I realized that of course things do not start with us, but also things do not end with us. So I always argue not only who are my predecessors, on whose shoulders I sit, but also who are my students. My students are equally important as my professors because I learn very much from them. So in other words, coming to our thing of followers are the essential thing. It's not irrelevant who follows you. And let me take another very important example. I would not like to have followers who uncritically follow whatever I have, whatever I do. Because we have seen that with Hitler, with Stalin, with blah, 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 just mention it. You have to have followers who are very critical of whatever one does. And when this thing is, you can hardly see fully back to, then I will stop, to what Bogdan said, this credit to one person. This is not in reality so. As a matter of fact, you have several Hamlets before Shakespeare Hamlets. You have parallel Newton and Leibniz working on something. Mendeleev made a significant things, but there are classifications before that. And so, yes, I mean, we are, there is this question of collectivity and individuality. Both of them somehow in a dynamic thing, not very easily. If you try to be a leader and you disconnect yourself, to use the Marxist term, from the masses, forget it, you will never lead anyone. Any other comments?
Mr. Comment, the last few points that made in his initial address the question of love thy neighbor. I think that's a good quote. Yeah.
This is together with, we share the...
Yes, we both. And I think he's quite right. There is a paucity, I think, of focus, at least outside of the psychological sciences, on the importance of, shall we say, the political economy of affection or affect. Yet, affect is central to solidarity at almost any level, whether it's patriotism or global commitments to human rights or peace or security and so on. And I just wanted to stress that I think there's a central and core feature there. There was a recent book written by a Frenchman, I can't remember his name now, but he actually explored world politics in terms of the specific issue of the manipulation of emotion and effect and affect and of course hate. So that when you look at some types of conflicts, you have ethnic or religious or ethno-religious things which reproduce hate. In other circumstances, you have a specific notion of creating a greater European Union based on solidarity and action, and this is one of the components.
Any other comments? Okay, we have yes.
May I just reflect on what Donato said? When you are in a concert, I presume everybody has made this experience, and you had an amazing performance, and you have a round of applause. Then when you have an encore, then you have applause again, and all of a sudden you have rhythmical applause. And who does direct that? It all of a sudden emerges. There's no leader, but it's there. And then another comment when Ivo said that I also watch out for my students, and when I want to direct, there's a great saying that it says that the pull of the future is more important than the push of the past. So that's a great quote, and let's raise the bar as high as possible and reach out for that bar.
Thank you. Really excellent questions and comments, and I'm more than ever looking forward to the rest of these sessions. We have two questions from the web. One from Naveen Madasheti. Some of you remember Naveen. He came to our meeting in Baku, and he was main author of that paper we distributed last week in Podgorica on the energy and ecology. He was doing the research on that. His question is, there were different kinds of leadership in the past, political, religious, etc. What kind would be the most effective leadership in the 21st century? If anyone wants to try that, it's okay. I think that's really the fundamental question of this course. And if we understand that, we would have accomplished a lot this week. I think it's a very right question. And then from Ashok, our fellow at Mother Service Society, Ashok Natarajan, he's asked a really difficult question, and I would love that we work on this, because it's central to the work of the Academy. Said it's proving very difficult to get rid of nuclear weapons. Is it possible that we develop new leaders on the scene who are persuasive enough to convince the world that it is good to get rid of these weapons? If so, what kind of leaders these people would be? I think it's a great question, not only because it's very challenging, but it's a good question for us to think about in the Academy and elsewhere. We've got many people who are totally convinced that these weapons should be gotten rid of. In fact, if you believe the public opinion surveys, even most of the population in many countries believe we should get rid of them. And yet, they're still there. So that's why we can't divorce the individual leader from the process of leadership and from the process of the society. This may be a bigger question than we can swallow here, but I think that this is the kind of question under the new paradigm we really have to ask ourselves, whether it's an individual or an organization or a movement or whatever it is. So thank you both for these questions. And we're going to end this session in a couple of minutes, and I'm not going to respond to all the excellent contributions. I just would like to acknowledge I very much appreciated the added dimensions that you're each giving to this subject. Boden, from the title idea of group creativity. Even in a group which appears to be leaderless, there's a certain attitude or culture. Maybe there's even values that can, bring out the creative. It's a very right question. And the fact that both you and Ivo were on the same subject, too often we think that our solutions are the result of a person. Or we credit a person with, whether it's a great intellectual discovery or product discovery or social movement. Mahatma Gandhi didn't liberate India from British rule. It was a long growing process. There were countless people who contributed to it. some way before him. There are those who disagreed with him and added important contributions. There were groups. There was a movement. And so I think it's important for us to keep thinking about leadership as a process in which the individual has a role, the ideas have a role, the organization has a role, and the society has a role. So this is very refreshing perspective. You wanted to say something?
Yes, I have not heard the word yet, catalyst.
Good,
And
great,
I hope it
excellent.
will come into our vocabulary as we continue.
And that's exactly the right word I should have used to really embody what you're saying. The leader is a catalyst. He may be, and we'll talk about some research on leaders later on in the meeting, which shows very often the most effective leaders don't meet this macho idea that he's the man out in front telling everybody what to do or even having the vision. But he has a certain approach that brings out the best from the group, and I think that's very healthy. Alberto's constantly reminding us, and this discussion reminded me, that we have a social construction about what leadership is. And much of what we'll be discussing here in the next 4 days is to try to outgrow the limits of that stereotype construction. Finally, I'm just going to close the session going back to... Yes. Of course, of course.
Triggered by again what Bonner said when he introduced the word. I would not like to introduce, but to remind us of the word that Alexander introduced in our meeting that we had in Podgorica. And this is the word fuse. Because when you go to the electrical analog, you all know how important the concept of the fuse is, because if you would not have that, very often you would have all sorts of problems. This way, there is one weak point where it stops and we don't have explosions, we don't have anything, and the thing is saved, you simply replace the fuse, and this is how the system works. I'm saying that because of the very important question raised by our friend Ashok. And of course, when we interact, we have this interaction between us here and somebody there, far away. We have to be very careful whether we even attempt to reply, because we communicate, though this electronic communication is marvelous, nevertheless, it lacks many things. The facial expression and the number of, and the timing, after all, minute as it is, but still it is. But since this is a so important question, let me nevertheless point out the nature of that specific question. The nature is rooted in what we like to think and what we express under the term linear thinking. Linear thinking is dangerous. Just think what actually would have happened if you make an ideal situation that there are no nuclear weapons now. Would we already be several times in the war? That's a non-trivial question. I don't know the answer to this. Think about it. The number of problems we had is related to that, and that goes back to the famous conditions of peace formulated by Immanuel Kant 200 years ago, where he said there are 3 conditions for peace. One condition is to have non-monarchies. We have non-monarchies now for quite some time, and monarchies are not the problem. The second is very intensive international trade. We have a very intensive international trade. You working in the World Trade Organization know that better than most of us. And the third condition is to have the weapon that is the final weapon that can destroy. Now, the only thing that we have that has really helped in a way is this weapon that is the weapon of doom. And not only one, we have several of them. Nuclear weapons, biological weapons. So the question is, isn't the condition eliminate the war a condition that should come before the condition of getting rid of nuclear weapons? I'm not arguing, I'm just saying that linearity is a tricky thing. And physics, it took about the millennium for physics to overcome the idea of linearity and realize how feedback loops, interconnectedness, and so on is all there, you know. So this is, you know, a shock, a humble attempt to say that your question is very deep and very profound, and it does require approaches from several sides.
Thank you to our panelists who all who participated now. Now we have a collective leadership challenge. We take a 15-minute break, and we're already actually a few minutes into that break. We start back here in just less than 15 minutes with Alexander's presentation on transformational leadership. So thank you all.